first question I got was about Geek Rock, my thoughts on it, about Talking Heads, Weezer, bands like that, and the overall attempt to kind of remove the machismo from the world of rock and roll. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure if Geek Rock actually exists, and if it does, it's probably the loosest classification possible. I mean, if you dig back a few decades, I feel like a group like Rush would have more credibility in that style than someone like Talking Heads. And I think maybe we should just use the term art rock for bands like that, because in the 70s, that's really what a lot of them were. The same goes for Weezer in my opinion, because I never really saw them marketing themselves to geeks specifically or anything like that. And even though they've been using it for almost 20 years, I've just never gotten behind the term geek rock. But I think you hit it on the head when you said over the past few decades, a ton of bands have been trying to take that machismo image away from rock and roll. It was really in the mid-70s, throughout the mid-80s, that this really took hold, as tons of teens found themselves completely unable to relate to the big arena bands. And if you study the early years of punk rock, it was pretty much started by a bunch of nerds. You know, the geeks, the outcasts, those people who really wanted a community of their own. That is exactly where bands like the Ramones come from. This absolutely carries right into the 80s hardcore scene, and you can see a definite link to the hip-hop world when it turned into nerdcore. Over the past few years, we've seen a rise in 8-bit groups and things like that, and I think they're definitely more fitting of the term than bands like The Rentals or Cake, as I think it's a little more accurate of what they're trying to do. Regardless of what you want to call it, anything that brings together people under the umbrella of music is a good thing. I got another email asking my thoughts on the neo-psychedelic style that's been coming up again over the last decade or so. Bands like Tame Impala, Foxygen, the Flaming Lips, and other groups like that. To be honest, I don't know if I'd put the Flaming Lips into the neo-psych group, but I really don't know what I'd put Flaming Lips in. They're one of those amazingly unique bands that nobody really makes music like. But to get directly to the question, I really dig the whole thing over the last few years of people stripping away all that studio polish and getting that psychedelic tone and feel back into their music. I really like it. I mean, when I hear people go on and on about how predictable rock music has become, I try and turn them on to neo-psych bands because that's definitely where the forward movement and experimentation is really going on. And it's the ideal place to find all of the creativity that remains alive and well within the world of rock and roll. I also love that you see things like the Austin Psych Fest really embracing that community, or labels like Beyond Beyond is Beyond bringing out some of the best bands possible in that style. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of the revival of that sound, and I think it's great for music as a whole. The last question I got asked me to speak about blues punk, what I thought about it, if I was into it, and things like that. This is another one of those genres that I actually don't believe exists. I really don't think there's a such thing as blues punk. At its core, blues music is one of the key fundamentals of punk rock. And in the early days, and even now, there are a number of acts that choose to bring a little bit more of the blues into their music than others. A lot of people like to point to bands like the Stooges and the Gun Club as the perfect examples of what blues punk is really about. But honestly, I just don't buy it. I hear what they're trying to say, but that's definitely punk rock or a different style of punk to me. This is also where you get a lot of folks trying to push Captain Beefheart into the world of punk rock, and I do not buy that for a second. I've also heard people drop the blues punk title on bands like Social Distortion or Dead Boy and the Elephant Men, and honestly, when you get such a diverse range of sounds, it completely dilutes any definition you're trying to make. Hell, the other week I actually heard someone say the Beasts of Bourbon were blues punk. And I think in all these cases, you've got terms like psychobilly or bar rock that are much more accurate and much more fitting than an overall title that people try and use like blues punk. Again, for me, this just raises the question of how important genre classification really is. And when it comes to the really loose definitions, few of them are a better example than blues punk. At the end of the day though, who cares what it's called? If it's great music, and that's all that matters. So those are my questions for this time. If you've got music related questions, go ahead and email me at thedailyguru@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook, and I'll see you guys again next time.